Hello, curriculum auditors. This is Matt Lawrence, professor of philosophy, and here in 2020, I'm also your student equity coordinator. And this video is designed to introduce you to the 8 equity precepts that you see here, and that will be kind of a framework for much of the curriculum audit. Let's kick off with our first precept, awaken. Awaken involves awakening ourselves to how institutional structures, as well as conscious and unconscious beliefs and attitudes about race, gender, and other identity contingencies lead to inequities in educational outcomes. The first thing we can do to awaken ourselves is to be familiar with the data. During the cultural curriculum audit, you'll be given your own course level data for success and equity disaggregated by race. Here's the course level data for the college as a whole. Notice that in the circles are most significant racial equity gaps. 19% for our African American students, 9% for our Latinx students, 12% for our Pacific Islander students. These percentages represent the gap between the performance of these student groups to our white students as a control group. Now, we must be very careful when interpreting this data. First, it's not meant to imply that there's anything special about our white students. They're being used as a control group only because, although white students can be disenfranchised in a number of ways, they have not been impacted by institutional and structural racism throughout their higher education and throughout society. One of the primary goals of the audit is to remedy the effects of racism in higher education. When analyzing your data, you do want to be sure to avoid a student deficit mindset. That is, we need to be clear that the problem does not lie within any of these racial groups. There simply is no inherent capability difference between these groups. Instead, we want to reflect on how institutionalized norms and attitudes and practices impact student success and how they've led to disproportionate impacts for some groups and what we can do to remedy that. Some quick tips for awaken include: first and foremost, take responsibility for the equitable success of your students. Come to see equity as part of your job and constantly reflect on what you can do to bring about more equitable success for your students. Realize that every norm, every attitude and policy embodied in your syllabus and in your teaching can impact equitable student success. And look for disproportionate impact throughout your policies, your grading structures, your course content, and design. Our second precept is welcome. The idea here is to create an inclusive classroom where students develop a sense of trust, connectedness, and belonging. Some quick tips for welcome. Examine the language and tone used throughout your syllabus and your Canvas site and your other teaching materials. Many of us have been raised on a tradition of a very punitive syllabus that instills students with the sense that they're not trusted from the very first day of the course. Instead, ensure that the language is positive and encouraging, and let students know that the classroom, whether it's real or virtual, is going to be a fun and exciting place to be. Be mindful of student insecurities and fear. Many of our students have been stigmatized throughout their educational experience. Many have had insecurities. Many of us have had our own insecurities throughout our college experience. And we need to remember those times and realize that such fears are often more prominent in our students. Some have been told straight out that they don't belong in college, so we need to ensure that we don't trigger pre-existing fears and negative self-talk. Use icebreakers and other collaboration activities for students to get to know one another, and use breakout groups in Zoom for small group discussions. For many students, speaking in front of the whole class can be intimidating. I find that many of the quieter students will engage and contribute more when they're in a small group discussion. And this in turn bolsters their confidence to speak to the whole class, especially when they've had the opportunity to try out their ideas first in the small group. Our next precept is partner. The idea here is to create a partnership in which faculty and students work together to ensure success. One partnering strategy that I've used is to encourage students to take advantage of student hours. I've had some success using a student hours coupon like this. Whether your student hours are in person or virtual, the key is really to get them to attend the first time and to become comfortable with it. The coupon offers an extra incentive for their first visit, and it outlines a variety of reasons for attending. For in-person classes, I also highly encourage doing an office tour where students all come up to the office in sets of 3. They step in, take a look around, grab a granola bar if they like. And I find that once they've actually been to the office and been inside, even just for a moment, they're more likely to come again. And then I always try to encourage students to talk about more than just what's on their mind at that moment, and to learn more about their academic and career goals and what I can do to help them with those. Some quick tips for partner include: let students know that you're there for them and clarify how they can seek your help. Examine your norms and late work and second drafts. Build your course to provide opportunities to improve based on helpful instructor feedback. And discover students' educational goals and find ways to support them beyond the classroom. Our next precept is represent. This involves representing the diverse backgrounds and experiences of our students in our curriculum, images, and assignments. Some initial strategies here. First of all, do an audit of your curriculum. How well does the diversity of your authors, of your sources, represent the diversity of our students? Then you can also do an images audit and examine all the images that you use in your PowerPoints, on your Canvas site. How well do they represent the diversity of our students? And do a course outline of record audit. Examine the degree of representation within the course outline of record. If it is completely based on a Western European canon, then that you are perpetuating that tradition for others in the department. So take a look at the course outline of record. And in all these attempts to diversify our courses, we need to be very careful to make sure that they are genuine. That is, that the diversity represented represents things that you see as valuable additions to the course and that are not merely token representation. This can be offensive to your students. So look for ways to make your curriculum better represent the diversity of the body. Use more representative and inclusive images and examples throughout your syllabus, Canvas site, and PowerPoints, and show that you value the diverse perspectives of your students in online forums and class discussions. Next up is empower. Engage and empower through curriculum and assignments that are relevant to our students' lives. For example, in my intro philosophy class, many students don't find philosophy to be inherently interesting. So one of the things I've done to empower students and to make philosophy relevant to them is by utilizing the course theme of how to think and live like a philosopher. The section from my syllabus lets them know that the course is going to introduce them to some of the most important philosophers, ideas, and philosophical theories of human history. But our emphasis throughout the course is on finding ways to apply these insights to our own lives. So much of the homework for students in this course is So sort of experiments in living where they find ways to apply the philosopher's theory, the philosopher's perspective to their own lives. And some of these homework assignments are very challenging, but they're also very personal. And I've found that it engages students so much more than some of the other methods that I've used. So quick tips. Examine your curriculum and assignments to maximize engagement and empowerment of your students. Ask yourself, what can I do to make my course material more relevant to their lives? Use the students' own culture and life experiences as assets. What can they bring that you can't? Create a Zoom or forum discussion environment in which everyone feels empowered to participate. And part of this involves closely managing microaggressions to make sure that everyone feels valued in the discussion. And find ways to involve your students in campus and community events. Next up is validate. Validate each student's ability to be successful. Here's a quote from, I was at a Men of Color conference sitting across the table from a counselor at Rio Hondo College, and he was telling me about his experience in community college, and he recounted his first English, turning in his first English paper, and he said, my English teacher read my paper and she murdered me. Said it was so marked up. Now this sounds like the beginning to an awful story, and I hope my students never feel that I've murdered them. But I think what he's communicating here is that she had a very high standard for what she wanted in the writing, and he was not at all at that standard. But what's really meaningful here is he said, she also told me that I write beautifully. And she offered to help me with my writing. And for this reason, he'll always remember her. This is a teacher that, although she made it very clear he had a lot of hard work ahead of him, she validated his ability and partnered with him to take him up to that next level. So this, in his educational trajectory went from at one time being incarcerated to now pursuing his PhD. So some quick tips for validate. Ensure that your syllabus and Canvas site conveys your belief that every student can be successful in your class. Maintain a growth mindset about your students and teach them about the importance of developing a growth mindset. That is, don't make the mistake of just because a student has performed poorly early on of thinking, well, that's all they can do. Of course, we're all here to learn and grow. And often students have developed that mindset of this is just who I am, this is all I can do. And we need to help encourage them to develop that growth mindset. Avoid punitive language that suggests a lack of trust and or low expectations of your students. Send kudos for excellent work and for improvement. And send encouragement to those who are struggling. Let them know that you still believe in them. Help give them the confidence they need to improve. Next up is elevate. Create opportunities for students to build their skills rather than to simply demonstrate their pre-existing skills. On campus, we did a student panel of African-American students. And I remember one young man talking about, again, turning in a paper for a course. And there were a lot of faculty in attendance, and his message to faculty is, I don't need you to judge my writing. I need you to teach me how to improve my writing. And this is what Elevate is all about. He said, we're teachers, just teach us. And the sentiment was he really just felt like turning in a paper is so much more centered around judging the work than developing the work. So some things to think about here for Elevate: create opportunities for students to build their skills rather than to simply demonstrate pre-existing skills. I mean, think about how that sort of one-off essay that you've learned a bunch of stuff now delivered in an essay doesn't give the student a chance to build their skills, especially if it's high stakes. Communicate high standards. This is not about lowering our standards. It's about having high standards, but communicating that they are high, that this is going to be hard work, but you are capable of doing hard work. So then communicate your belief that the student is capable of attaining those high standards. And be explicit and encouraging about what the student needs to do to meet the standards. Too often, faculty feedback can relate to that overall judgment without explicit and encouraging words about what to specifically do to meet the standards. And finally, we have demystify. Demystify assignments, course and institutional policies, practices, norms, and the transfer process. The idea here is that many of our students don't have a strong college background and network. And so we need to demystify this thing that is college. One way we can do this is by demystifying our assignments, making our assignments as transparent as possible. You'll be learning more about this when you study the transparent assignment protocols later in the audit. Where there you're encouraged to really clarify the purpose of the assignment, to clarify the tasks of what students need to do and how to do it, and to be very clear about the criteria of what excellence looks like. We also need to demystify transfer. Our transfer rate is dismal, and so students need more support in learning what's involved with transfer. So I highly encourage everyone to talk about ed plans in their classes, talk about ADTs, give reminders about upcoming deadlines for FAFSA and applications and so forth, and announce transfer related events. It really takes a village to make sure that our students are transferring when ready. So, quick tips for demystify. Demystify classroom expectations and assignment expectations. Light the way to success by modeling and scaffolding your assignments. Inform your students about campus resources such as tutoring centers, computer labs, disabled student services, psychological counseling, and so on. And use a clear and straightforward grading scheme and post your grades in Canvas and encourage your students to check their grades regularly. So those are our 8 equity precepts. I hope you find them valuable. I hope as you go through the curriculum audit, you will think about these, think about how you can, what are you currently doing in your course to empower students, to demystify curriculum, to represent, and so forth. And I hope that you will be collaborating with others to develop more techniques to embody these values in your course. All right, that's all for me. Thanks.